Hello, everybody. Welcome. In English, many of our words have a number of senses. And these are the enumerated definitions one might find in a dictionary. And ordinarily, as we become enlanguaged and as our capacities for languaging behavior become more sophisticated, we learn to intuitively distinguish the meanings of words that we hear or read, people speak to us, and so on. So that when there is a word with a number of senses, we determine which sense was intended. But sometimes we may also imagine, what if the other senses were intended? Or what if some of the other, or one of the other senses were intended? And sometimes this becomes the catalytic pivot of humor, and is involved in certain kinds of wordplay like punning. The first example that comes to mind is the phrase "a cunning linguist," which is a pun on a form of oral sex. And it's actually a meta pun because, though I wasn't intending this, and this is part of the beauty of humor, humor is often accidentally more sophisticated than it was initially intended to be. And in fact, this is one of the fundamental features of humor, that there's a kind of a secret, right? That one aspect of the mind has long been aware of this secret, and another aspect of the mind has overlooked it, and suddenly these two aspects come into coincidence through linguistic play, and there's sort of a spark, right? And the spark makes us laugh, which is a wonderful experience, to laugh when it is not cruel. And most of it isn't cruel. So the meta pun was that I was speaking cunningly of linguistics, right? But I didn't intend that when I selected a pun from sort of the top of the bag, right? Nor was I secretly thinking about, the referent of the pun, right? I wasn't imagining performing such an act, or seeing such an act performed, or so on. I was merely trying to find a quick pun. And perhaps that's not the correct word for that particular linguistic construct. There are a number of different technical terms that describe certain forms of linguistic play or behavior, tropes, and other things. And many of these come from ancient cultures like the Greeks and those before them. Certainly, many of the things the Greeks discovered or are famous for were well known by previous cultures or older cultures, such as those in India and China, etc. Though the Greeks and the Latins seem to have a peculiar affinity for linguistic play and sophistication. So one of the senses of a word that we use to mean to deeply consider is to reflect upon. And this is an interesting sense of the word, but it's the phenomenon itself that I'm actually concerned with today. And I've often considered, reflected upon the ideas that I'll speak briefly about this afternoon. And I consider them to be very profound. Though superficially they're easy to grasp the surface of, there's something deep inside them that's truly rich, unexpectedly deep, perhaps infinitely deep, and is important to orient our awareness towards. I'm personally deeply fascinated by the phenomenon produced when light hits water. And of course, all of our technologies are interesting implementations of something similar, right? When photography was being developed, we would capture the light in a medium that could retain the image of the captured light from a specific place and time. And it's very important, this idea. You know, I walked past a place where a friend of mine and I were having a conversation yesterday, and it was very strange because I felt an echo, in a sense, of what had gone on yesterday, and yet neither of us, the beings we were yesterday, were not there today, and he was not there, and I was there in a different way. But it was as if the place retained something of a recording in a way, except a recording isn't the right word, because what living beings do is not record, and what living places do is not recording. It's different from that. It's more related to memory, and it's unfortunate that we may have come to think of memory as a form of recording, for it is not recording. And I think if you consider deeply any event in your life, you will notice two things about your memory. It resembles a record, but it is not a record. In part because it is alive. It is alive in the sense that you are alive. Your consciousness is alive, or meta-alive, more than merely just alive, because it is more than merely just your brain, just your body. So in this sense, memory is transcendental. It transcends mere embodiment, right? Mere material incarnation. Many of the phenomena that are produced when light reflects on water are extremely profound. And this afternoon, I saw something I've seen many times. A mother and child were sitting next to the little pond here, actually walking by a little pond, but this one is so covered with greenery that no water is visible. They were crouched. Of course, the child was standing and the mother was crouched next to the pond in the garden, and I could see their reflections in the water. And I thought to myself, what is the nature of those reflections? And isn't our mind a bit like this water, in which our experience is reflected, yet, the nature of reflections is quite complex. The ginkgo tree has dropped all of its leaves. The old ginkgo. It's golden. And in the light it shines very golden. The nature of reflections is quite complex, so that if the water is still, then the water becomes very mirror-like. But disturbances in the water distort the reflections. Now, of course, this word distort displays a bias that we humans often employ towards something that we imagine to resemble perfection. So that if it's not a one-to-one correspondence, we presume a distortion is occurring. And generally, distortion has a negative connotation. We see it as degradation of signal. And yet, one could reflect on the idea that imagination is a form of active transformation or distortion of the real, the probable, and so on, to produce often something exquisitely beautiful. Surely it would be very difficult to determine what a poem means if we simply derive the sense definitions, of each, the definitive senses of each of the words in the poem. Music is a little easier generally, songs are a little easier generally to transcribe, because we can probably describe some of the connotative exhortations that occur in sung, like folk songs and popular songs and music. We can translate the tropes in a way, and the metaphors and the analogies and so on. But my point is that poetry and song could be understood, if one was so inclined, as distortions of ordinary language, yet they produce great beauty. And certain kinds of distortions or transformations of reflections in water also produce great beauty. The sunlight, as it is setting or rising, sparkling on the waves, produces a coruscating phenomenon, scintillating phenomenon that's exquisitely beautiful and trance-inducing. When I saw the mother and the daughter, I recalled a series of insights I once had long ago, in which it occurred to me that what we understand as the material universe is actually the reflection of something transcendental in something that water is the physical derivative analogy of, the sub-analogy of. So that time-space becomes the meta-water in which the divine world of origin is reflected and the forms in time-space then become peculiarly transformed reflections of principles in what we might imagine as the transcendental universe, the timeless universe of origin. The world, since we have to think kind of in terms of worlds we don't know, we don't have a better idea, although we have these ideas of heaven and hell and so on. But the transcendental place, time, meta-being of origin is then reflected in all of the phenomenon in time-space. And wouldn't it be fascinating if once we are born, we become very confused over time? We may remember this when we are first born, but by the time we can speak of it, we've lost these memories, most of us, though some traces of them tend to remain throughout our lives. Wouldn't it be fascinating if we had confused this reflection here in time-space with that which is producing it in the universe outside of time, that is essentially, its relationship to time is transcendental, right? It doesn't have a temporality. That's part of the reflection down here. So if we confuse this thing here, which is actually a reflection in time-space of something that, for the sake of convenience, we will call our soul, recognizing that that soul is not a distinct thing, but is something shared among all of the things that make reflections down here. So we have confused, in a sense, this doll with its origin. And so too we confuse our ego with ourself, and our embodiment with something that can be gained or lost, and is something we should strive desperately to preserve against all possible, harm and against death and so on. When really this is just a reflection in time-space and matter and in organism of a transcendental being, or a web of communal unity in the world of origin. And this is the pond. And you can see the water is fairly calm, but you can see the reflection, gently transforming on the surface of the water. And the primary thing that is like that fluctuation of the surface for us embodied beings is time, probably. But light and time seem to go together. We have separated things in thought and theory that cannot truly be distinct in their nature, in their essence. And so it occurred to me when I was watching the mother and the daughter, and they were over there. Yes, they were over on the other side of the pond there. And you can see the reflection of that rock. So you can see the rock with the white part near the water. And you can see how it is inverted in a way, in the water. And what if the inversion of not mere immortality, but transcendental being, what if the inversion of that in our experience of embodiment and in time-space is the illusion of temporal extent, of a beginning and an end of life? So that in fact we are transcendentally, first of all, in this sort of transcendence we are not merely individuals. individuals are also part of the strange inversion of the reflection, right? So that in the communal transcendence of the universe of origin, we aren't merely all one. We are transcendentally unified. So we are both many and one and something else that we cannot consider. And we are not merely immortal, right? We are both temporally limited. We have lifespans, and we are immortal, and something beyond both of those things. Yes, all three of these things. So that some of the inversions down here are that we have like a lifespan, and that I seem to be a separate Darren, with experiences of minutes and hours and days and years and so on. I have experiences of well-being and of disease and of sadness and joy and all of these things. So you can see, like, in the reflection, certain things are inverted. And if the universe, a material existence, this beautiful paradisical world of life that we live in, is a reflection, some of the inversions would be the felt sense of distinct things. Yeah. Even though it's pretty clear nothing's really distinct, right? If the atmosphere goes away, I go away. If the earth goes away, I go away. If all of the life forms on earth go away, I go away with them. If the sun goes away, gone, right? So you can see many of these things are interdependent. Most of them are interdependent. And so I imagine that when I saw the mother and her daughter reflected in the water, I thought, does the water contain the mother and the daughter? I can see them in the water, but are they in the water? And the ghosts of them in the water, in the reflection, they look a lot like the mother and daughter, but not exactly, and they are upside down, and there's inversions, right? And there are reversals. So some of the inversions and reversals that could happen if I were actually a not dissimilar phenomenon, right? A reflection in the waters of timespace of a phenomenon that is transcendental. Some of the inversions could simply be things like I am distinct, or I have a limited lifespan, or I am just this one person, or my mind is contained in my body, right? These kinds of things could be inversions. And because we cannot see the origin place ordinarily, though there is a way to participate in it directly, there are ways, we cannot imagine the incredible limitations of our ideas as compared to that which produces these effects in time-space. Now, this reflection thing is very deep, yeah? This idea of reflections. And there are lots of other ideas that are deep too, like the flicker fusion effect. If something turns on and off, right, at a fast enough pace, it appears to us that it is always on. So what if another part of the reflection phenomenon is that most of the time the universe isn't here, but it's turning on and off so quickly? Let's just say that you can imagine this toy, right? I have a word for this toy. I can't remember it at the moment. But imagine that all distinct things, all the way down to, at least the atomic level, perhaps beyond. Imagine that all of them suddenly collapse to a single speck of pure unity. Yeah? And then they flash back into existence, taking up their previously held positions. And when they collapse to unity, they share all the information that they previously had gathered, all the uniqueness of each of the individual elements, the unique perspectives and charges and senses and experiences. When they collapse, they share them, and then they go back to being distinct again. But this happens countless trillions of times per trillionth of a second, so that it looks to us like things are always separate and distinct. Yeah? And this could be another aspect of the inversion, right? The inversion of permanent, inviolate distinctness could be completely illusory. Most of the time, everything could be one transcendental speck, and only a tiny part of the time it could be distinct. And we would never know as long as the transition were fast enough. In fact, if it were fast enough, objects would seem solid even though they are not. Yeah? Minds would seem distinct even though they are not. Lifetimes would seem separate even though they are not. Organisms would seem to be distinct beings even though they are not. All of the seemings of our world could be explained by this one little toy. And this is just a toy, right? Consider also that the media in which we record visual images is a physical instancing of the phenomenon of reflection in water. Right? Our videos, our movies, our shows, our photographs, all of these things, they are examples of a technology derived from the human experience of reflection in water. Some time ago, someone thought, what if I could capture that reflection and make it permanent? And this is similar to the idea of human physical immortality. What if I could capture that separate egoic self and make it permanent so that it doesn't have to experience death? And there's an aspect of the mind that's very fascinated in this. That aspect is extremely dangerous. It seems clear that limiting the temporality of specific organisms was an innovation that life came up with, a good innovation. Unless you were very ignorant, what you would want is to have new embodiments and forms of embodiment that are current for the essential being, the soul, or the essence of the being to incarnate into, right? Instead of just having one that was made, in 1960 or something, even though it's now 2022. So the world takes care of this incarnation process in part by creating new vehicles that are updated, in a sense, right? Not in the way that humans update technology, in a much more fascinating way. New forms of being, new possibilities for organisms over time. And also anciently conserved forms like the whale and the octopus and the cuttlefish and the praying mantis and the ant and the bee and the bird, the crab, the millipede, the centipede, the coelacanth, coelacanth? Can't remember. All of the beings who have ever lived have seen this moon. The camera sees it very poorly and very dimly. It's a bad reflection. But all of our video technologies and such, they are based on the idea of reflections and capturing them, preserving them, recording them, and so on. Remember some of the things that I have discussed today, particularly that your memory is not a recording, and that the physical universe might be best understood as the reflection of something transcendental that exists beyond time and space. And yet, we can find the character of this transcendental world expressed and embodied in the vast variety of life and the living relationships of living places and beings, their activities and specializations, their forms, their eyes, their hearts, their feelings. So, this is my reflection. This is what I've been reflecting on this afternoon. Together with you, I hope that you find it enlightening and provocative and inspiring.